When my son told me that I would not be welcome at his house for Christmas, I smiled, got in my car, and made one call. By the new year, I had their mortgage payments canceled, and that was just the beginning of my plan. Justice must be restored and arrogance punished. You won't believe what I did next. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening in the comments. I could make my famous turkey this year, I said, settling deeper into Michael's leather couch. The one with the sage stuffing your mother used to love. Remember how she'd always say it was better than her grandmother's? The words hung in the warm air between us, mixing with the scent of Isabella's expensive vanilla candles. Michael shifted beside me, his wedding ring catching the light from their 12-foot Christmas tree. Something in his posture changed, shoulders pulling inward like he was bracing for impact. Dad, unfortunately, you won't be welcome here for Christmas. The words hit me like a physical blow. I blinked, certain I'd misheard. What do you mean? Why wouldn't I be welcome? Michael couldn't meet my eyes, his gaze fixed on the marble coffee table, the one I'd helped him pick out last spring when Isabella decided their old furniture wasn't sophisticated enough. Isabella's parents are coming and they'd prefer if you weren't here. My hands went cold. They'd prefer? It's just easier this way, Dad. You know how her family is about traditions. They have their own way of doing things. His voice got smaller with each word, like he was shrinking inside himself. I looked around the living room, at the silk curtains I'd paid for when Isabella complained about privacy, at the hardwood floors that had come from my second mortgage, at the crown molding that had maxed out my credit card. Every inch of this house bore my fingerprints, my sacrifice, my love for my son. Their own way, I repeated slowly. And what way is that, Michael? He flinched. Dad, please don't make this harder than it has to be. Through the kitchen archway, I could see Isabella's new KitchenAid mixer, the professional-grade one she'd insisted she needed for her holiday baking phase that lasted exactly 3 weeks. $2,000 of my money sitting there, probably used twice since October. Where will I spend Christmas, then? The question came out quieter than I intended. Michael's face crumpled. Maybe you could, I don't know, maybe visit Aunt Rosa, or we could do something the weekend after? The weekend after. Like Christmas was just another appointment that could be rescheduled for convenience. I stood up, my knees protesting after 8 years of carrying this burden alone. I see. Dad, wait. But I was already moving toward the door, past the family photos where my face grew smaller and more distant in each frame, past the coat closet that held Isabella's $1,000 jackets. My hand found the doorknob, solid and cold under my palm. Son, I said without turning around. Tell Isabella's parents I said Feliz Navidad. The December air hit my face like a slap as I walked toward my truck. Behind me, I heard Michael call my name once, then the soft click of the door closing. Final. Absolute. I sat in the driver's seat for a moment, engine off, watching the Christmas lights twinkle in the windows of houses I'd never be welcome in. My phone buzzed, probably Michael wanting to smooth things over with empty promises and guilt. I didn't answer. Instead, I turned the key and drove into the darkness, leaving behind the warm glow of the house I'd bought, but would never belong in. The heater hummed against the December cold as I navigated the familiar streets toward home. South Hills sprawled around me, every neighborhood corner holding memories of the man I used to be, the one who believed family meant everything, who'd give his last dollar to see his son smile. That man was a fool. I stopped at the red light on 29th and Grand, watching a young father load Christmas presents into his SUV. His kids pressed their faces against the window, breath fogging the glass with excitement. Once upon a time, that had been Michael and me. Before Isabella, before I became nothing more than a walking ATM with inconvenient emotions, the numbers started rolling through my head like a broken slot machine. $2,800 every month for 5 years. My calculator had given up trying to make sense of it last spring when I'd finally added up the total, $140,000. More money than Maria and I had saved for our entire retirement. Gone. Just gone. I pressed the accelerator harder than necessary as the light turned green. The truck responded with a growl that matched my mood. 5th Street. That was where I'd refinanced my house. Our house, Maria's and mine. to cover their down payment. The loan officer had looked at me with pity I hadn't recognized at the time. "Mr. Flores, are you sure about this? You're putting a lot at risk for someone else's investment." Someone else's investment? Not my son's future, not my family's security. Someone else's investment. Lincoln Street, the bank where I'd taken out a second mortgage when Michael lost his job 2 years ago. "Just temporary, Dad. Just until I get back on my feet." Isabella had stood behind him, $700 purse slung over her shoulder, nodding sympathetically while mentally calculating how much my desperation was worth. Nothing, as it turned out. My desperation was worth nothing to them. I pulled into my driveway, the one with the cracked concrete I couldn't afford to fix, because every spare dollar disappeared into their perfect suburban fantasy. The porch light flickered, another repair I'd been putting off. Inside, the house felt hollow without Maria's laughter, without the warmth of family gatherings that would never happen again. My phone rang as I fumbled with my keys, the shrill tone echoing off the empty walls. Isabella's name flashed on the screen, probably wanting to explain why I wasn't good enough for her parents' delicate sensibilities. Perfect timing. I'd been waiting 5 years to have this conversation. I answered on the fourth ring, letting her wait just long enough to wonder if I'd pick up at all. "Dennis!" Isabella's voice dripped with false sweetness, the same tone she used when asking me to cover their water bill or property taxes. "I heard about the little misunderstanding with Michael." "Misunderstanding?" I leaned against my kitchen counter, still wearing my coat. "I don't think there's any misunderstanding, Isabella. You made your position quite clear." "Look, I know this seems harsh, but you have to understand my parents' perspective. They're very traditional people. They expect a certain atmosphere during the holidays." "A certain atmosphere," I repeated. "And what atmosphere is that?" A pause. I could hear shopping bags rustling in the background, probably spending money that should have gone to their mortgage payment, money that was my responsibility, apparently. "Well, they're not used to your kind of cooking. All that spicy Mexican food and loud music. And frankly, Dennis, they're educated people. They expect conversations about current events, literature, art, you know." The words hit harder than a physical blow. 8 years of biting my tongue, of swallowing insults for Michael's sake, of pretending not to notice the way she looked at me like I was some kind of hired help. "My kind of cooking." My voice stayed level, controlled. "You mean the food you ate every Sunday for 3 years when money was tight? The tamales you said reminded you of your grandmother?" That was different. We were appreciative then, but now with my parents... "Now with your parents, you can't have the Mexican peasant embarrassing you at your fancy dinner table." The false sweetness evaporated. "Don't be dramatic, Dennis. This isn't about race, it's about class. My father graduated summa cum laude from Washington State. My mother speaks 4 languages. They summer in the Hamptons. What exactly would you contribute to dinner conversation? Stories about laying tile?" Heat flooded my chest, but I kept my voice steady. "I built a business from nothing after your husband's grandfather died. I've employed over 50 people. I've paid more in taxes than your father made in his best year. Money isn't everything, Dennis. Breeding matters. Education matters. And frankly, Maria understood her place better than you understand yours." The line went dead silent. She'd crossed it. The line I didn't even know existed until she'd stomped across it in her designer heels. "What did you say about my wife?" "I'm just saying she knew how to blend in better. She didn't make waves. She understood that some spaces weren't meant for her." My hand tightened around the phone until my knuckles went white. "Maria had more class in her little finger than your entire bloodline will ever possess." "Oh, please. She was a house cleaner who got lucky. At least she had the good sense to stay quiet about it." "Isabella?" My voice dropped to something I didn't recognize. "I want you to listen very carefully. This conversation is over. We're done pretending to be family. You can't just—" "We're done," I repeated, and ended the call. I set the phone down carefully on the counter, my hands surprisingly steady. Around me, the kitchen felt different, smaller but somehow cleaner, like a weight had been lifted from the air itself. I walked to my desk in the corner, pulled out the manila folder I'd been avoiding for months. Bank statements, mortgage papers, 5 years of automatic transfers that had bled me dry while they lived like royalty. Time to stop the bleeding. Part 4. The first decision, canceling the mortgage. The documents spread across my kitchen table like evidence at a crime scene. 5 years of bank statements, each one showing the same automatic transfer. $2,800 on the 15th of every month, vanishing from my account into theirs. A paper trail of my own stupidity. I pulled out my calculator and started adding. The first year, $33,600. The second year, another $33,600. By the third year, I'd stopped buying myself new clothes. The fourth year, I'd started shopping at discount grocery stores. This year, the fifth year, I'd been eating peanut butter sandwiches for lunch to make ends meet. $143,400. Not counting the down payment, not counting the times I'd covered their utilities when Isabella's shopping addiction got out of hand. Not counting the new roof, the landscaping, the furniture that was essential for their lifestyle. I sat back in my chair, looking at the numbers until they blurred. Maria's life insurance money, my retirement savings, the college fund we'd started for grandchildren I'd apparently never be allowed to see. All of it gone, poured into a house where I wasn't welcome for Christmas dinner. I reached for my phone, scrolled through my contacts until I found the number for my bank. The automated system offered me options in English and Spanish. How thoughtful, how accommodating to people like me. Customer service, this is Jennifer. How can I help you today? I need to cancel an automatic transfer, I said, my voice steadier than it had been in years. Certainly, sir. I'll need your account number and some verification information. I rattled off the numbers, watched her type in the background. Professional, efficient, no judgment about why a 62-year-old man was canceling payments to what was probably his son's mortgage. I see the transfer you're referring to, Mr. Flores. $2,800 monthly to Wells Fargo, account ending in 7423. How long have you been making this transfer? 5 years. The words tasted bitter. And you want to cancel it effective immediately? I looked around my kitchen, at the outdated appliances I couldn't afford to replace, at the walls that needed painting, at the windows that leaked cold air because I'd spent my home improvement money on someone else's castle. Effective immediately, I confirmed. Done. The transfer has been canceled. Is there anything else I can help you with today? No, I said, surprising myself with how good the word felt. No, that's everything. I hung up and sat in the sudden quiet of my house. Outside, December darkness was settling over Spokane. Christmas lights twinkling in windows where families gathered without conditions, without judgment, without the need to hide who they were. For the first time in 5 years, next month's budget would balance. For the first time since Maria died, I could afford to fix my porch light, buy decent groceries, maybe even take a vacation. I gathered up the bank statements, the mortgage papers, all the evidence of my generosity. Then I walked to my fireplace, struck a match, and watched 5 years of martyrdom turn to ash. The fire felt warm on my face, warmer than I'd felt in years. My phone buzzed with a text message, probably Michael wanting to apologize, or Isabella, needing money for something essential like new throw pillows. I didn't check it. Instead, I poured myself a glass of the good whiskey, the bottle I'd been saving for a special occasion that never seemed to come. Tonight felt special enough. I raised my glass to the empty room, to Maria's photo on the mantel, to the man I used to be and the man I was becoming. Merry Christmas to me, I said, and meant it. Part 5. Isabella's Provocation. The next morning arrived crisp and clear, December sunlight streaming through my kitchen windows as I nursed my second cup of coffee. For the first time in years, I wasn't calculating how much money would disappear from my account in 3 days. The freedom tasted better than the Colombian blend I'd finally allowed myself to buy. My phone rang at exactly 10:47 a.m. Isabella's name flashed on the screen like a warning label. Dennis! Her voice carried that familiar tone of barely concealed impatience. I need you to pick up my parents from Spokane Airport. Their flight from Portland arrives at 2 o'clock. I set down my mug carefully, watching the steam curl toward the ceiling. Isabella, did you forget about our conversation yesterday? Look, Whatever that was about, we need to focus on practical matters now. My parents need transportation, and you're the only one with time during the day. The audacity was breathtaking. Less than 24 hours after telling me I wasn't worthy of sharing Christmas dinner with her family, she expected me to serve as their personal chauffeur. And you're asking me because... Because that's what family does, Dennis. They help each other. Her voice sharpened with irritation. Besides, let's be honest here. You're not my rival. You're too weak to be my rival. So just get in your truck and pick them up. There it was, the final insult wrapped in a command. What airline? I asked quietly. Alaska Air, Flight 447. They'll be at baggage claim Carousel 3. And Dennis, they're expecting someone who can handle their luggage properly. Don't embarrass us. I could hear her nails tapping against something hard, probably her granite countertop, the one I'd paid for when she decided laminate wasn't suitable for her dinner parties. Of course, I said. I'll take care of everything. Good. And wear something decent. Maybe that blue shirt you wore to Michael's graduation. They notice things like that. The line went dead. She hadn't even said thank you. I sat back in my chair, looking at my phone's blank screen. 2:00. Flight 447. Baggage claim Carousel 3. I glanced at the wall clock above my sink. 10:52 a.m. Plenty of time. I poured myself another cup of coffee, added an extra spoonful of sugar, and opened yesterday's newspaper to the crossword puzzle I hadn't finished. 7 across. Delayed gratification. 12 letters. The answer would come to me eventually. Part 6. The Airport Trap. At 2:15 p.m., I was settling into my favorite armchair, with a fresh cup of Earl Grey and the Spokane Review's Sunday edition. The crossword from yesterday lay completed on my coffee table. Delayed gratification had been postponement. My phone buzzed against the wooden surface. Isabella's name again. I let it ring. The December sun slanted through my living room windows, warming the space where I'd spent so many lonely evenings counting the cost of my generosity. Today the silence felt different. Earned, intentional. 2:47 p.m. The phone buzzed again. This time I could see the preview of her text. Dad, where are you? My parents are. I turned the phone face down and returned to the sports section. The Seahawks had lost again. Some things never changed. By 3:30 my phone had buzzed 6 times. I'd finished the newspaper, brewed a second pot of tea, and started organizing the junk drawer in my kitchen table. Amazing what you could accomplish when you weren't rushing around serving people who considered you their personal bellhop. The 7th call came at 3:45. Instead of Isabella's name, I saw unknown number. Probably her parents borrowed someone's phone at the airport. I let that one ring too. Outside, a neighbor was hanging Christmas lights on his porch, his children running around the yard with the manic energy that only December afternoons could bring. Normal families doing normal things. No one was stranded anywhere, waiting for someone who would never come. 4:15 p.m. My phone started ringing and didn't stop. Isabella, then the unknown number, then Isabella again. The buzzing became constant, like an angry wasp trapped against glass. I walked to my kitchen and unplugged my landline from the wall. Then I turned my cell phone completely off. Perfect silence. I made myself a grilled cheese sandwich and heated up a can of tomato soup. Comfort food I hadn't allowed myself in months, because every grocery dollar had gone toward making ends meet, while subsidizing their lifestyle. The cheese melted perfectly golden, the soup steamed in my favorite mug. Outside, the winter sun was already starting to set, casting long shadows across my backyard. Somewhere across town, 3 people were probably standing in an airport parking garage, arguing about taxi fare and wondering how their personal servant had the audacity to strand them. The thought made my soup taste even better. By 5 p.m. I'd eaten dinner, loaded my dishwasher, and was considering what movie to watch. It had been years since I'd had an entire evening to myself without worrying about emergency calls for money or last-minute favors. I was reaching for the remote when someone started pounding on my front door. Not knocking, pounding. The kind of aggressive hammering that rattled the frame and announced pure fury. I set down my tea and walked slowly toward the sound, already knowing exactly who I'd find on the other side. The pounding intensified as I approached the door, each blow more violent than the last. Through the peephole, I could see 3 figures crowded on my small porch, like wolves circling prey. I opened the door to find Cody Jenkins's red face inches from mine. "What the hell is wrong with you?" he shouted, pushing past me into my living room without invitation. "We waited at that goddamn airport for over 3 hours." Catherine followed him, her usually perfect hair disheveled, her lips pressed into a thin line of pure hatred. "This is completely unacceptable behavior from someone your age, Dennis. Absolutely barbaric." Isabella brought up the rear, her designer coat wrinkled, her makeup smeared. "You humiliated us. Do you have any idea what you've done? My parents had to take a $40 taxi because you decided to get out of my house." My voice cut through their chorus of rage like a blade through silk. They stopped mid-rant, shocked by the steel in my tone. "Excuse me?" Cody's face went from red to purple. "You don't get to make demands here, buddy. Not after what you pulled today." "This is my house," I said quietly, not moving from my position by the door, "and I want you out. Now." Catherine stepped forward, her voice dripping with the kind of condescension she'd perfected over decades of looking down on people like me. "Dennis, you clearly don't understand the magnitude of your mistake. My husband has connections throughout this city. Business connections, social connections. You can't treat people like us this way and expect—" "This was a lesson for you," I interrupted, meeting her gaze steadily. "A lesson about your excessive arrogance and your poor treatment of people you consider beneath you." Isabella's mouth fell open. "A lesson? Who do you think you are to teach anyone anything? You're nobody. I'm someone who finally stopped being your personal bank account and taxi service." I stepped aside and held the door open wider. "The lesson is over. You can leave." Cody jabbed a finger toward my chest, but didn't quite dare touch me. "You have no idea who you're messing with, old man. I've been in this town longer than you've been breathing its air. I know people, important people, people who can make your life very, very difficult." "Is that a threat, Mr. Jenkins?" "It's a promise." His voice dropped to a menacing whisper. "You think abandoning elderly people at an airport is just something you can do without consequences? You're about to learn exactly how wrong you are?" Catherine nodded, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. "Indeed. Actions have consequences, Dennis, and yours will be quite public." Isabella grabbed her father's arm. "Daddy, let's just go. This pathetic old man isn't worth our time." They filed out of my house like a defeated army, but Cody turned back at the threshold. "You'll regret this," he said. "I guarantee it." I closed the door behind them and turned the deadbolt with a satisfying click. Through the window, I watched them pile into their rental car, still arguing among themselves as they drove away into the December darkness. The house felt cleaner with them gone, as if their presence had left a stain that was only now lifting, but their parting words echoed in the sudden quiet. Public consequences, important people, connections. I walked back to my living room and picked up my tea, still warm in its mug. For the first time in this whole mess, I felt something that might have been concern, but it was overwhelmed by something much stronger: anticipation. 3 days later, I was enjoying my morning coffee and scanning the Spokane Review when I saw my own face staring back at me from page 3. The headline read, "Spokane Businessman Abandons Elderly Couple at Airport During Holiday Storm." My hands went still around the coffee mug. There I was, in black and white, an old photo from my company's website, probably 5 years out of date. Below it, a story that made my blood run cold and my temper flare in equal measure. Cody and Catherine Jenkins, visiting their daughter for Christmas, were left stranded at Spokane International Airport for over 4 hours Sunday when family member Dennis Flores failed to appear for a prearranged pickup. The couple, both in their late 50s, waited in frigid temperatures as a winter storm warning was issued for the region. Winter storm warning. It had been 52 degrees and sunny. "We couldn't believe someone would just abandon us like that," said Cody Jenkins, a retired banking executive. "We called repeatedly, but Mr. Flores never answered his phone. We were forced to take an expensive taxi in dangerous weather conditions. At our age, this kind of treatment is not just inconsiderate. It's dangerous." The article continued with quotes about my pattern of erratic behavior and concerns about my mental state. Cody had painted himself and Catherine as helpless victims of a cruel old man who'd suddenly snapped without provocation. No mention of the Christmas dinner rejection, no context about Isabella's demands or their years of financial exploitation. Just me, the villain who abandoned poor elderly tourists during a blizzard that existed only in Cody's imagination. I set down my coffee and read the article again, slowly, then a third time. The byline belonged to Patricia Morrison, lifestyle editor. I didn't recognize the name, but I recognized the strategy. Cody had called in favors, used his banking connections to get this story placed exactly where it would do maximum damage to my reputation. Smart, very smart. For the first time since this whole mess started, I felt a grudging respect for my opponents. They weren't just entitled trust fund babies throwing tantrums. They were strategic, calculating. They understood that in a small city like Spokane, reputation was everything. One well-placed newspaper article could destroy decades of hard work. They'd declared total war. I folded the newspaper carefully and set it aside, my mind already shifting into the methodical planning mode that had built my business from nothing. This wasn't about airport pickups anymore. This wasn't about Christmas dinner or mortgage payments. This was about winning. I pulled out my laptop and began typing names into search engines. Cody Jenkins, Catherine Jenkins, Isabella Flores, their social media profiles, their connections, their habits, their weaknesses, everything they'd foolishly made public over the years. If they wanted to play chess, I'd show them what a real strategist looked like. I glanced at my wall calendar. December 18th. 7 days until Christmas. 7 days to plan something they'd never forget. I spent the next 3 days living in a different world. Not the world where I was Dennis Flores, the broken-down old man who let his family walk all over him. This was the world where I was Dennis Flores, businessman, strategic thinker, someone who'd built something from nothing and wasn't about to let a bunch of entitled parasites destroy what I'd worked 40 years to build. My laptop became command central. Social media profiles filled my browser tabs like playing cards in a high-stakes game. Cody Jenkins, retired First National Bank manager, member of the Spokane Country Club, treasurer of the Inland Northwest Business Leaders Association. A man who'd spent his career in positions of trust and influence, a man with a lot to lose. Catherine's Instagram painted a perfect picture of refined living, charity luncheons, wine tastings, vacation photos from Coeur d'Alene tagged with Chash Blessed Life. Every post carefully curated to project success and sophistication. Comments from friends praising her elegant taste and inspiring lifestyle, all built on other people's money, including mine. Isabella's Facebook timeline told the real story. Posts about our beautiful home with photos of the kitchen I'd paid for. Check-ins at expensive restaurants during the months when I'd covered their utility bills. A status update from last week. So excited for Christmas dinner with family. Can't wait to show off our hosting skills. Our hosting skills. Our home. Our success. The narcissism was breathtaking. But it was Michael's LinkedIn profile that gave me the final piece I needed. His recent activity showed a new connection. Patricia Morrison, lifestyle editor at the Spokane Review. The same Patricia Morrison who'd written the hatchet job about me. I leaned back in my desk chair, looking at the evidence spread across my screen. These people had made 3 critical mistakes. First, they'd underestimated me completely. Second, they'd gone public with their attack, which meant I could go public with my response. Third, they'd documented their entire privileged lifestyle online, creating a perfect catalog of hypocrisy. I clicked through to Patricia Morrison's profile. 43 years old, journalism degree from WSU, 15 years at local papers. No previous connection to banking or finance, which meant Cody had reached out cold, probably through someone he knew from his business network. A 5-minute search through local business directories confirmed my suspicion. 3 mutual connections between Cody and Patricia's editor. The story hadn't just appeared, it had been planted carefully and deliberately. Amateur hour. I opened a new document and began typing. Not a response to their media attack, something much better. A timeline. 5 years of financial support, documented with bank statements, receipts, and canceled checks. The down payment for their house, $47,000 from my home equity loan. The kitchen renovation when Isabella decided granite countertops were essential. $18,000 from my credit card, 60 monthly mortgage payments of $2,800 each, $168,000 and counting, $250,000, more than I'd spent on myself in the last decade. My phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. Probably Isabella, trying a new angle. I ignored it and kept working. By evening, I had everything organized in a manila folder thick enough to choke a horse. Bank statements, receipts, photos downloaded from their social media showing off purchases I'd funded, a printed copy of the newspaper article with my handwritten notes in the margins, documenting each lie and distortion. I looked at my wall calendar. December 24th was circled in red, not because it was Christmas, but because it was the perfect day for justice. According to Isabella's Facebook events, they were hosting Christmas dinner for 12 people. Family friends, neighbors, members of their social circle. The kind of people who read the Spokane Review and formed opinions based on what they saw there. The kind of people who deserved to know the truth. I closed my laptop and walked to my kitchen, where I'd left my good camera, the one I'd bought years ago to document job sites for my business. Time to put it to work, documenting something else entirely. Tomorrow was Christmas Eve. Tomorrow, Cody Jenkins and his family were going to learn what happened when you declared war on someone who actually knew how to fight. Christmas Eve morning dawned gray and cold, the kind of Spokane winter day that made you grateful for warm houses and family gatherings. Too bad I wouldn't be welcome at either. But I had other plans. I laid out my evidence like a lawyer preparing for trial. Bank statements organized by year, each monthly payment highlighted in yellow. Receipts arranged chronologically, showing the pattern of my support for their lifestyle. Photos printed from their social media. Isabella's new jewelry, their vacation photos, the expensive Christmas decorations currently adorning the house I'd helped them keep. All of it copied 12 times, one for each dinner guest. The newspaper article went on top of each stack, my red pen notes visible in the margins. Lie written next to Cody's quotes about dangerous weather. False, beside the claim about my erratic behavior. Missing context, highlighted where they'd failed to mention 5 years of financial support. I dressed carefully in my best suit, the navy blue one I'd worn to Maria's funeral, pressed and ready for another kind of farewell. Today I was saying goodbye to the man who'd been a doormat for his family. Tonight I'd be someone who commanded respect. At 6:30 p.m. I loaded my briefcase with the evidence packets and drove to Kendall Yards. Their house glowed with warm light, cars filling the driveway and lining the street. Through the front windows I could see figures moving around the dining room, Isabella playing hostess in the home my money had helped them buy. I parked across the street and checked my watch. 6:45. Perfect timing. Late enough that everyone would be seated for dinner. Early enough that they'd still be on the main course. No easy escape for anyone. The front door was unlocked. Of course it was. Isabella loved to show off how safe their neighborhood was, how they didn't need to worry about security, like people in rougher areas. I let myself in quietly, the warm air hitting my face along with the sounds of laughter and conversation from the dining room. And then Catherine said, "But darling, that's not how we do things in our family," someone was saying, followed by more laughter. Our family. After everything they'd done to exclude me from it. I walked into the dining room carrying my briefcase, 12 faces turning toward me with expressions ranging from surprise to horror. Isabella froze with her wine glass halfway to her lips. Michael's face went pale. Cody and Catherine looked like they'd seen a ghost. "Good evening, everyone," I said calmly, setting my briefcase on their marble sideboard. "I hope you don't mind me joining your Christmas celebration." Isabella found her voice first. "Dennis, this is completely inappropriate. You need to leave immediately." "Actually," I said, opening my briefcase and pulling out the first stack of papers, "I think your guests deserve to know who really paid for this dinner, this house, and this lifestyle you've been showing off." A woman I didn't recognize, probably one of Catherine's charity friends, leaned forward with curiosity. "What is he talking about, Isabella?" "He's having some kind of episode," Isabella said quickly. "Michael, call someone." But I was already moving around the table, placing a packet of documents in front of each guest. "Here are the bank records," I said conversationally. 5 years of financial support, $168,000 in mortgage payments alone, plus the down payment, renovations, furniture, appliances, everything you see around you. The room went silent except for the rustling of papers as 12 people began examining the evidence. I watched their faces change as they absorbed the numbers, the dates, the undeniable proof of my generosity and their deception. "This is," one man started, then stopped, staring at a bank statement. "Outrageous," finished the woman across from him. "Isabella, why didn't you tell us any of this?" Isabella's perfect composure was cracking. "It's more complicated than it looks. Dennis volunteered to help us. We never asked." "Actually," I interrupted, pulling out the newspaper article, "let's talk about what you did ask for, and what you told the media about me." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. I placed copies of the newspaper article on the table, watching as the dinner guests recognized my photo from the unflattering story that had run 3 days earlier. "Now," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the sudden silence, "let's talk about the real manipulators in this family." Cody's face had gone from red to ashen. Catherine sat rigid in her chair, her wine glass forgotten in her hand. "Mr. Jenkins here used his banking connections to plant this story," I continued, tapping the newspaper. "Notice how I'm portrayed as unstable and dangerous, abandoning poor elderly people in freezing weather." A gray-haired man in an expensive sweater looked up from the article. "Cody, what is this about?" "The weather was 52 degrees and sunny," I said before Cody could answer. "And they weren't stranded tourists. They were Isabella's parents, coming to the Christmas dinner I'd been banned from attending because I wasn't good enough for their company." Catherine finally found her voice. "That's not... We never said..." "You never said what, Catherine?" I pulled out my phone where I'd screenshotted several of Isabella's social media posts. "That I was too low-class for your parents? That my Mexican food and working-class conversation would embarrass you in front of your educated friends?" The woman I'd identified as one of Catherine's charity friends shifted uncomfortably. "Catherine, surely you didn't..." "He's twisting everything," Cody blustered, but his voice lacked conviction. "This man has serious mental health issues. The stress of aging, financial problems..." "Financial problems?" I almost laughed. "Mr. Jenkins, I've been supporting your daughter and son-in-law to the tune of nearly $3,000 a month for 5 years. The only financial problems here are the ones you're about to have." I turned to address the entire table. "These people have taken $200,000 from me while calling me names behind my back. They've manipulated my son against me, banned me from family gatherings, and when I finally stood up for myself, they tried to destroy my reputation in the newspaper." Michael spoke for the first time, his voice barely above a whisper. "Dad, I didn't know about the newspaper." "Your wife knew," I said quietly, "and her parents orchestrated it. They turned me into a villain for refusing to be their personal ATM and chauffeur." The social dynamic in the room was shifting like tectonic plates. I could see it in the guests' faces, the gradual realization that everything they'd been told about tonight's generous hosts was built on lies. "This is unconscionable," said an elderly woman in pearls staring at the bank statements. "Cody, how could you let your daughter take advantage of this man's generosity, then attack him publicly when he stopped enabling it?" Cody's carefully maintained facade was crumbling. "You don't understand the full situation." "I understand perfectly," the woman interrupted. "This man has been supporting your family financially while you treated him like hired help. And when he finally said no, you tried to ruin his reputation." Catherine's voice came out strangled. "He abandoned us at the airport. After you told me I wasn't welcome at Christmas dinner because my presence would be inappropriate for your parents," I said calmly. "After 5 years of paying their bills while you looked down on me for my ethnicity and education level." The silence was deafening. 12 people staring at Cody and Catherine with expressions ranging from disgust to embarrassment for having associated with them. Isabella made one last desperate attempt to control the narrative. "Everyone, please. This is a family matter that's gotten out of hand." "No," I said firmly. "This stopped being a family matter when you made it public, when you used the newspaper to attack my character, when you decided my reputation was acceptable collateral damage for your pride." I looked around the table at faces I didn't recognize but who now knew exactly who I was. "I wanted you all to know the truth before you read about Dennis Flores in the paper again. because you will read about me again, but next time it'll be the real story. I close my briefcase and straighten my tie. Enjoy the rest of your dinner. It's the last one I'll be paying for. As I walked toward the door, I could hear the eruption beginning behind me. Voices raised in accusation, questions demanding answers, the sound of a carefully constructed social facade falling apart. It was the most beautiful Christmas music I'd ever heard. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in March, delivered by certified mail with the weight of legal consequences behind every word. I signed for it at my front door, noting how the spring air smelled of new growth and possibility instead of the winter desperation that had marked those dark December days. Notice of default, the envelope read. Final demand for payment. Inside, 3 months of missed mortgage payments had caught up with Michael and Isabella like a tsunami of reality. $8,400 in arrears, 14 days to bring the account current, or face foreclosure proceedings on the house I'd helped them buy. I set the letter aside and returned to my coffee, reading it the way you'd read news about distant weather. Interesting, but not your problem anymore. My phone had been ringing for weeks with increasingly desperate calls. Isabella's number blocked after the first hysterical voicemail. Cody and Catherine, whose social standing in Spokane had evaporated like morning mist after their Christmas dinner humiliation. Even Michael, whose calls I'd been ignoring out of a mixture of anger and curiosity about how long it would take him to swallow his pride. The answer, apparently, was 97 days. He knocked on my door that Thursday evening, no longer the confident man who'd excluded me from Christmas dinner, but someone who looked like he'd aged a decade in 3 months. Dark circles under his eyes, his expensive suit wrinkled, the smell of desperation clinging to him like cheap cologne. "Dad," he said when I opened the door, "we need to talk." I stepped aside to let him in, noting how he looked around my house like he was seeing it for the first time. The new furniture I'd bought with my first mortgage-free paycheck, the fresh paint on walls that hadn't been updated in 8 years, because every spare dollar had gone to his lifestyle. The repairs I'd finally been able to afford now that I wasn't subsidizing someone else's American dream. "Nice place," he said quietly. "It's what happens when you spend money on yourself instead of people who don't appreciate it," I replied, settling into my new recliner. "Coffee?" He shook his head, perching on the edge of my couch like he was afraid to get comfortable. "Dad, I need you to know how sorry I am. About everything. Christmas dinner, the newspaper article, the way the way we treated you." "Go on." "I didn't know about Cody planting that story. I swear I didn't. When I found out..." He ran his hands through his hair. "Jesus, Dad. The things they said about you behind your back. The way they talked about our family. About Mom's memory." My jaw tightened at the mention of Maria, but I kept my voice level. "And what exactly did they say about your mother?" "That she knew her place better than you knew yours. That she understood. Boundaries." He couldn't meet my eyes. "I should have defended you. I should have stood up to them years ago." "Yes," I said simply. "You should have." We sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of 5 years of mistakes filling the space between us. Outside, I could hear my neighbor mowing his lawn, the normal sounds of a normal Thursday evening in a normal neighborhood, where sons didn't exclude their fathers from Christmas dinner. "The house is in foreclosure," Michael said finally. "I know. We can't make the payments without..." He stopped, seeming to realize how that sounded. "Without my help," I finished. "Without the money I was sending every month while you let your wife's family treat me like garbage. I know how it looks." "Michael." I leaned forward, making sure he was looking at me. "Do you know how much money I sent you over 5 years?" He nodded miserably. Isabella calculated it after Christmas. The mortgage payments, the down payment, everything else. Over $200,000. $237,468, I corrected. "I know the exact amount because I finally did something I should have done years ago. I added it up." His face crumpled. "Dad, I'm so sorry. I don't know how to fix this." "You can't fix it, son. That money is gone. But more importantly, those years are gone. 5 years when I could have been building a relationship with you instead of funding your wife's fantasy life." I know that now." He looked up at me with something that might have been hope. "But maybe we could start over? maybe there's a way to. Are you asking me to resume the mortgage payments? The hope died in his eyes. We're going to lose everything, Dad. The house, Isabella's respect for me, her parents' approval. I don't know what I'll do. You'll figure it out, I said, not unkindly. The same way I figured out how to live without a son who respected me. The same way I learned to spend Christmas alone while you celebrated with people who thought I was beneath them. He started to cry then, quietly, like a man who'd run out of other options. I lost you, didn't I? I chose them over you, and now I've lost you forever. I watched him for a long moment, this man I'd raised and loved and sacrificed for, who'd let his wife's family convince him that his father wasn't good enough for their company. Michael, I said finally, you didn't lose me. You gave me away. There's a difference. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. Is there any chance, any way you could forgive me? I forgave you months ago, I said, and meant it. But forgiveness doesn't mean going back to the way things were. It doesn't mean pretending this didn't happen, or that I'm going to resume paying for a lifestyle that came with the condition that I be grateful for scraps of your attention. Then what does it mean? I stood up and walked to my mantel, where Maria's photo sat next to a new picture. Me with Rosa and her family at Easter dinner, the first holiday I'd spent with people who actually wanted me there. It means that if you want a relationship with me, you'll have to build it from scratch. It means showing me respect instead of demanding I earn it. It means making choices based on what's right, not what's convenient. I turned back to him, and it means that the next time someone, your wife, her parents, anyone, tries to exclude me from family gatherings, you'll remember who actually acts like family. He nodded slowly, understanding perhaps for the first time that respect wasn't something you could take for granted. The house, he asked quietly, isn't my problem anymore. I sat back down, feeling lighter than I had in years. You're a grown man, Michael. Figure it out like grown men do. Get a job that pays enough to cover your bills. Sell the house and buy something you can afford. Stop living beyond your means and expecting other people to subsidize your choices. He stood up slowly, his shoulders straight, for the first time since he'd arrived. You're right, about all of it. I know. He walked to the door, then turned back. Dad, for what it's worth, seeing you stand up for yourself at Christmas dinner, I was proud of you. Embarrassed and angry, but proud too. Good, I said. Maybe there's hope for you yet. After he left, I poured myself a glass of the good whiskey and stepped onto my back porch. Spring was coming to Spokane, the trees beginning to bud, the air warming with promise. In 4 months, I'd be 63. Maria had been gone for 8 years. I'd wasted 5 of those years being a doormat for people who didn't appreciate sacrifice. I wasn't planning to waste any more. My phone buzzed with a text from Rosa. Dinner Sunday? The kids want to show you their school projects. I smiled and typed back. Wouldn't miss it. Real family, it turned out, was something you found with people who actually wanted you there. Everything else was just expensive theater, and I was done buying tickets to shows where I wasn't welcome on stage. The whiskey tasted like freedom, and the future looked exactly as bright as I was willing to make it. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching. You're fired! My son, whom I helped build an empire, kicked me out, forgetting all my sacrifices. I left quietly, taking one document with me that reveals his dirty secrets. When he found out, he went berserk. Monday is going to be fun. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is where you are now. The financial reports hit Douglas's glass desk with a soft thud that seemed to echo through his 47th floor office. I watched my son's fingers freeze over his keyboard, shoulders tensing beneath his tailored suit jacket. The afternoon sun cast sharp shadows across the minimalist space, highlighting every steel edge and pristine surface. Douglas, these numbers don't add up. The investors might... He didn't look up, not immediately. Instead, he continued typing, each keystroke deliberate and dismissive. The city hummed 47 floors below us, muffled by thick glass that sealed us in this sterile monument to modern success. Dad, you don't understand modern business. His voice cut through the silence as he finally spun his chair around. Your methods are 20 years outdated. I kept my expression neutral, though something cold settled in my chest. 40 years of building companies, of surviving market crashes and economic uncertainty, reduced to outdated methods by my own son. I straightened the papers, organizing them with practiced precision. I was building companies when you were still... When I was what? Douglas shot to his feet, his coffee cup clattering against the glass surface. Dark liquid spread across quarterly projections, staining the pristine documents. When I was a child? Dad, I'm not a child anymore, and I don't need a babysitter. The coffee dripped steadily onto the marble floor. Each drop marked time in this strange, hostile space that used to feel like shared ground. Douglas turned his back to me, hands pressed against the floor-to-ceiling windows, staring out at Lake Michigan's steel-gray waters. These investor projections show risk factors that could what? He didn't turn around. Could ruin everything I've built? Could destroy the vision you never understood? I gathered the coffee-stained papers, my movements deliberately calm. 20 years ago, when Grant FinTech was drowning in debt, Douglas had begged for my help. $20,000 from Eleanor's and my retirement savings had kept this company breathing. Now that same desperate young man stood with his back to me, dismissing decades of experience like yesterday's news. The leverage ratios in these derivatives are perfectly calculated for maximum growth potential. His reflection in the window showed cold determination. You see risk where I see opportunity. That's the difference between your generation and mine. The silence stretched between us, filled only by the distant hum of Chicago traffic and the steady drip of coffee hitting marble. I folded the stained documents, sliding them into my briefcase with movements that felt ancient, mechanical. Douglas remained at the window, his reflection a stranger in expensive clothes. The young man who once stayed up all night, learning financial modeling from me, had vanished, replaced by this confident executive who saw his father as an obstacle to remove. I'll review these projections with the compliance team, I said quietly. Do whatever you think is necessary. His voice carried finality, dismissal wrapped in corporate politeness. I moved toward the door, each step measured and dignified. Behind me, Douglas's reflection watched my retreat in the window's surface. The hallway stretched ahead, leading to elevators that would carry me down to reality, away from this glass tower where my own son had just declared war. The door closed with a whisper-soft click. Douglas never turned around. The conference room door closed with finality behind Douglas, as I sat at the far end of the mahogany table, still processing our argument from 30 minutes earlier. 3 board members shuffled through quarterly reports, their comfortable chatter about market projections creating a familiar corporate backdrop. Something felt different about Douglas's entrance, too purposeful, too calculated. He took his position at the head of the table with deliberate confidence, settling into the leather chair like he was claiming the throne. The afternoon light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows caught the cold gleam in his eyes. I shifted uncomfortably, intuition warning me that this routine meeting had transformed into something else entirely. I've made a decision about management restructuring. Douglas's voice cut through the casual conversation like a blade. Effective Monday, Columbus Grant will no longer be working with the company. The room fell silent. Margaret Chen, our longest-serving board member, dropped her pen. It clattered against the polished table surface, the only sound in a space suddenly thick with shock. James Morrison's mouth opened slightly, while Patricia Williams stared at Douglas, as if he'd spoken in a foreign language. "Douglas, but your father—" Margaret began, her voice barely above a whisper. "My father will receive appropriate compensation. This is a business decision." The words hit me like physical blows, each syllable precisely chosen for maximum impact. 20 years of sacrifice, of building this company from near bankruptcy to its current success, dismissed as a restructuring decision. The public setting made the humiliation complete. Douglas had chosen this moment, this audience, with surgical precision. I felt every eye in the room on me, watching for my reaction. The corporate setting that had once felt like home now seemed like a courtroom where I'd been sentenced without trial. The wall-mounted screens displaying company metrics suddenly felt like monuments to my obsolescence. Rising slowly from my chair, I maintained the dignity that had carried me through 4 decades of business challenges. The leather creaked softly as I stood, gathering my remaining pride like armor around me. Douglas's calculated cruelty hung in the air, visible to everyone present. I understand. My voice remained steady, though each word cost me something precious. Good luck to you, son. Douglas didn't flinch at the title. He sat perfectly still, watching my graceful exit, with the same cold calculation he'd shown entering the room. The board members avoided my gaze, uncomfortable witnesses to a family drama they'd never expected to see played out in their professional sanctuary. The hallway stretched before me as I walked away from 20 years of my life. Behind me, the conference room remained silent. No one spoke in the wake of what they'd witnessed. My footsteps echoed against marble floors, each one carrying me further from the company I'd helped save, toward an uncertain future my own son had thrust upon me. The elevator buttons glowed softly as I pressed the number for my floor. As the doors slid closed, I caught a final glimpse of the conference room where my professional legacy had just been publicly executed. Douglas's silhouette remained motionless at the head of the table, victorious in his corporate coup. My office door closed behind me with a soft click, finally offering the privacy I desperately needed. My hands trembled slightly as I set down my briefcase, the first crack in the composure I'd maintained through Douglas's public execution of my career. The familiar space felt foreign now, as if I were seeing it through different eyes. Cardboard boxes sat stacked in the corner. Someone had anticipated this moment, prepared for my departure before I'd even known it was coming. The efficiency of it struck me like another blow. How long had Douglas been planning this? How many people had known before me? I began mechanically placing personal items into the nearest box. Family photos spanning decades came first. Douglas's graduation from Northwestern, Eleanor and me at our 25th anniversary, the three of us at the company's first profitable quarter celebration. Each image told a story of investment, sacrifice, love that had apparently meant nothing to my son. My fingers found a manila folder buried beneath quarterly reports. The documents inside were yellowed with age, financial statements from 2008, when Grant FinTech was hemorrhaging money and facing bankruptcy. I remembered that desperate night when Douglas had called, his voice breaking as he explained how close the company was to collapse. "Dad, I need $20,000. It's our only chance." Eleanor had worried about using our retirement savings, but I'd believed in him. The young man whose passion for financial innovation had impressed even skeptical investors deserved that chance. I'd written the check without hesitation, watching Douglas's relief transform into determination. The phone rang, startling me from the memory. Eleanor's voice carried concern mixed with disbelief. "Columbus, what happened? Mia said there was an emergency board meeting, and now people are whispering." I sank into my chair, staring out at Chicago's streets as evening approached. The words felt like broken glass in my throat. "Eleanor, our son fired me, publicly, in front of everyone." Her sharp intake of breath carried through the phone line. "Oh, my dear, come home. We'll talk this through." 20 years, Eleanor. 20 years I gave to this company. I continued packing with my free hand, wrapping a small bronze award in tissue paper. "Do you remember when I mortgaged our house to cover payroll during the recession? When I worked 16-hour days to rebuild client confidence after the market crash?" "I remember all of it," she said softly. "You saved that company more than once." The documents from 2008 lay spread across my desk like evidence in a case I was only beginning to build. My $20,000 investment had been the bridge Douglas needed to reach bigger investors. My connections, my reputation, my decades of industry relationships had opened doors he couldn't have opened alone. He called it a business decision, I continued, organizing the financial papers with growing purpose. "Restructuring," he said, as if 20 years of partnership, of mentorship, could be restructured away like outdated equipment. "Come home," Eleanor repeated. "We'll figure this out together." As darkness fell over Chicago, I remained in my office, surrounded by boxes that contained the artifacts of a professional lifetime. The betrayal burned in my chest, but beneath the pain, something else was forming, a quiet determination that surprised me with its intensity. The 2008 documents told a story Douglas had apparently forgotten. But I remembered everything, every sacrifice, every risk, every moment when my experience and resources had saved his vision. The game he'd started today would be played by rules he'd never learned. Eleanor's voice faded as I hung up the phone, leaving me alone in the gathering darkness of my office. The warm circle of lamplight felt like the last refuge in a world that had suddenly turned hostile. I reached for the brass switch, flooding my desk with yellow light that made the scattered papers glow like evidence in a courtroom. The manila folder marked 2008 Financial Crisis, Personal, sat buried beneath quarterly reports I'd never see completed. My fingers traced the faded writing, my own handwriting from 17 years ago when desperation had a different face, a younger voice pleading for salvation. Inside, bank withdrawal slips told their own story. $20,000. Our entire savings account drained in a single transaction. Eleanor's reluctant signature appeared beside mine on the withdrawal authorization, her careful script betraying the worries she'd tried to hide during those late-night kitchen conversations. If you don't help me, I'll lose everything. Douglas's voice echoed from memory as I held his original business plan. His desperate annotations covered the margins, calculations, projections, promises written in the shaky handwriting of a man facing financial ruin. The tear stains had long since dried, but I remembered how his voice had broken that night. The loan agreement bore both our signatures, mine, steady and confident despite the risk, his, trembling with gratitude and solemn promises. I'll pay it back with interest. I promise, Dad. The words seemed to pulse beneath the lamplight, each letter a vow he'd apparently forgotten. I stood and walked to the window, holding the document against the glass. Downtown Chicago sprawled below, its lights twinkling like stars in an urban constellation. Somewhere in this maze of ambition and steel, my son was probably celebrating his corporate coup, toasting his independence with colleagues who had no idea how that independence had been purchased. You promised, Douglas. The words escaped in a whisper that fogged the window. You promised everything. Back at my desk, I arranged the documents with methodical precision. Bank records, loan agreements, business plans, evidence of a father's faith in his son's potential, evidence of sacrifices made willingly, investments in a future we'd planned to share. The handwritten notes in Douglas's youthful script mocked me now. Their earnest gratitude transformed into bitter irony. My hands trembled slightly as I placed each document in my briefcase. These papers represented more than money. They were proof of trust betrayed, promises broken, gratitude discarded like yesterday's newspaper. $20,000 that had meant everything to us, nothing to him now. The desk lamp's warm glow suddenly felt oppressive. I switched it off, plunging the desk into harsh fluorescent light that cast sharp shadows across the remaining boxes. The transition felt symbolic, from nostalgic warmth to cold reality, from father to adversary. But as I continued packing under the unforgiving overhead lights, something crystallized in my chest. This wasn't just about money or gratitude anymore. This was about a man who had forgotten where he came from, who treated loyalty like a commodity to be discarded when convenient. Douglas had started a game today. Soon he would learn that his father still remembered how to play. Working through my desk drawers had become mechanical, efficient, each opened compartment revealing another chapter of my professional life, ready for boxing. The bottom drawer, however, refused to budge. Years of disuse had warped the wood, and I pulled repeatedly until it suddenly lurched open with a sharp crack. Files I didn't recognize spilled across the floor, documents marked with Douglas's initials, papers that clearly belonged in the CEO's office, not mine. Perhaps they'd been stored here temporarily during some reorganization, forgotten in the chaos of quarterly reports and board meetings. The first document appeared routine, an internal financial summary for Q4 2024, but the numbers made me pause. According to my memory, our profit margins had been strong, but not exceptional. These figures showed something different entirely, projections that seemed impossibly optimistic for our market position. I spread the papers across my cleared desk, adjusting my reading glasses under the harsh fluorescent lights. The second document revealed clear discrepancies with the public financial reports I'd reviewed just hours earlier. Where our published statements showed modest growth, these internal documents claimed explosive profitability. "What is this?" I whispered, holding up a handwritten note in Douglas's familiar scrawl. "Profit margins increased by $1 million?" My phone came out instinctively, fingers navigating to the publicly filed quarterly reports. The contrast was stark, undeniable. Our official SEC filing claimed $2.3 million in quarterly profits. These internal documents projected $3.4 million to potential investors. "Douglas, what have you done?" The third document contained detailed breakdowns of investor presentations, carefully crafted narratives designed to paint Grant FinTech as more profitable than reality suggested. Margin calculations had been artificially inflated, debt obligations minimized, growth projections stretched beyond any reasonable expectation. This wasn't creative accounting. This was systematic fraud. I checked the hallway nervously before returning to the documents, my business instincts screaming warnings I should have recognized earlier. The camera mounted at the corridor intersection seemed to watch with electronic indifference as I photographed each page with trembling hands. Douglas's handwritten notes revealed the scope of his deception. Emphasize Q4 growth trajectory. Minimize debt-to-equity discussion. Focus on projected revenues, not current reality. Each annotation was a deliberate step away from truth, toward the kind of financial manipulation that destroyed companies and sent executives to prison. This isn't creative accounting. This is fraud. The words tasted bitter, spoken aloud in the empty office where I'd spent 2 decades building legitimate success. The final document was a timeline, Douglas's plan for securing major investment capital based on these inflated projections. He intended to present this fabricated financial picture to institutional investors within weeks, potentially securing millions in funding based on lies. My son wasn't just arrogant and ungrateful. He was a criminal, systematically deceiving investors while building his empire on foundations of fraud. The young man who had once sobbed gratefully in our kitchen had become someone I didn't recognize, someone willing to destroy innocent investors to feed his ambition. I secured each document carefully in my briefcase, beside the 2008 papers that told such a different story. The contrast was overwhelming. Then, a desperate son seeking help from his father. Now, a criminal son who had forgotten the difference between ambition and theft. Standing in my office doorway, I looked down the darkened hallway toward Douglas's distant office. The moral decision had crystallized with shocking clarity. This wasn't about family loyalty anymore. This was about right and wrong, about protecting innocent investors from my son's greed. The hallway stretched before me as I walked purposefully toward the elevator bank, briefcase in one hand, a small box of personal items in the other. My footsteps echoed against marble floors in the nearly empty building, each step carrying me further from 20 years of my life, and closer to an uncertain future I was only beginning to understand. Douglas's office door opened unexpectedly ahead of me, stopping me mid-stride. He emerged carrying files for what I assumed were weekend meetings, his tailored suit still pristine despite the long day. Neither of us had planned this encounter, but his presence felt inevitable. One final confrontation before I left this building forever. He stepped directly into my path, blocking easy passage to the elevators. I stopped respectfully, but didn't step aside, maintaining the dignity that had carried me through 40 years of business dealings. His eyes flicked to the box in my arms with cold satisfaction, as if my packed belongings confirmed his victory. Douglas glanced at his expensive watch with theatrical impatience, a gesture designed to remind me of my new status as an unwelcome intruder in what had once been my professional home. "Dad, I need you gone in 5 minutes. Security is locking down the building." "Understood. And don't forget to turn in your company car keys." His voice carried the casual cruelty of someone accustomed to wielding power over others. "The Lexus needs to be in the parking garage by Monday morning." The car. 20 years of service, and he wanted to reclaim even that small courtesy. I shifted my briefcase to a more secure grip, feeling the weight of the documents inside, evidence that would reshape our relationship permanently once I decided to use it. Douglas turned away dismissively, expecting compliance without question. His confident stride carried him toward the executive wing, where he would spend the weekend preparing presentations based on fraudulent financial data. He moved like a man who had never faced real consequences, who believed his position insulated him from accountability. "Very well, son, let's play by your rules." My words were spoken quietly, almost to myself, but they carried the weight of a declaration of war. Douglas disappeared around the corner, unaware that his father's capitulation was theatrical, temporary. He had pushed beyond the boundaries of business conflict into personal cruelty, and that final insult about the car had crossed a line I hadn't known existed. I pulled out my phone as I continued toward the elevators, scrolling through contacts until I found Gordon Hale's number. My lawyer, my old friend, someone who understood both business law and the complexities of family betrayal. The phone felt heavy in my hand, loaded with potential consequences that would change everything. The elevator arrived with a soft chime, its polished doors reflecting my determined expression. As I stepped inside and pressed the button for the ground floor, I felt the weight of transformation settling around me like new clothes. I was no longer Columbus Grant, the dismissed father seeking sympathy. I was Columbus Grant, the businessman with evidence of criminal fraud, preparing to teach his son that respect isn't optional and consequences aren't negotiable. The elevator descended smoothly, carrying me toward a future where family loyalty would take second place to justice. Gordon's contact information glowed on my phone screen as the elevator doors closed. Time to make the call that would change everything. Gordon's law office felt like a sanctuary of old-world professionalism as I entered Monday morning, carrying my briefcase with the photographed evidence that would change everything. Heavy wooden furniture and leather-bound legal volumes lined mahogany shelves, while morning sunlight streamed through tall windows overlooking Michigan Avenue. The weight of tradition and justice filled this space, making it the perfect venue for what I had to do. "Columbus, close the door and have a seat." Gordon's greeting carried none of our usual pleasantries. My Sunday evening call had clearly prepared him for something serious, though he couldn't have imagined the scope of what I'd discovered. I placed the printed photographs across his leather-inlaid desk without ceremony. "Gordon, I need you to review these confidential materials and tell me what legal options we have." He adjusted his reading glasses and began examining each document with the methodical precision that had made him one of Chicago's most respected corporate attorneys. His expression grew increasingly grave as he studied Douglas's handwritten notes, the inflated profit projections, the systematic deception designed to mislead potential investors. "Columbus, these are serious allegations. Are you certain about this?" His voice carried the weight of someone who understood federal criminal law. "Gordon, I worked in finance for 40 years. I know fraud when I see it." The documents spoke for themselves. Internal reports showing one set of numbers, while SEC filings showed completely different figures. Investor presentations built on fabricated financial data. Gordon pulled several legal reference books from his shelves, cross-referencing securities regulations with what we'd uncovered. His computer screen filled with federal statutes as he verified current SEC requirements for financial disclosure. The systematic nature of Douglas's deception became clearer with each legal standard we reviewed. "This constitutes federal securities fraud, Columbus. The SEC and FBI would handle this." He made detailed notes on his legal pad, organizing potential charges and evidence requirements. "The penalties are severe: significant prison time, massive fines, permanent disbarment from corporate leadership." What do I need to do? First, we file an anonymous whistleblower complaint with the SEC. Then, depending on their response, you might need to cooperate with a federal investigation. Gordon secured copies of the evidence in his office safe, following proper legal protocols. "There are strong whistleblower protections, but this will likely require your testimony if charges are filed." He explained the investigation timeline. Federal agencies move deliberately but thoroughly when presented with clear evidence of securities fraud. The process could take weeks or months, but Douglas's systematic deception provided exactly the kind of documentation prosecutors needed for successful convictions. You understand this will destroy his career permanently? Gordon's question carried the weight of friendship, legal advice, and recognition of the family implications. Once federal charges are filed, there's no going back. I thought of Eleanor's worried face, of the young man who had once sobbed gratefully in our kitchen, of the arrogant executive who had publicly humiliated me days earlier. The evidence spread across Gordon's desk told the story of a son who had forgotten the difference between ambition and criminality. Schedule the meeting with the FBI, Gordon. Some lessons can only be learned the hard way. Tuesday afternoon found me navigating federal building security with the nervous precision of someone entering unfamiliar territory. Metal detectors, ID verification, and badge-wearing guards created an atmosphere of institutional authority that made my mission feel both official and irreversible. Agent Ramirez had scheduled our meeting for 2 p.m. after reviewing my preliminary complaint filed that morning. The FBI field office occupied several floors of the federal building, its standard government furniture and American flag creating an environment of serious purpose. Agent Ramirez, a woman in her mid-40s, with the bearing of someone accustomed to complex financial crimes, escorted me to an interview room equipped with recording equipment. Mr. Grant, I want to explain our procedures before we begin. Her professional tone carried no judgment, only methodical thoroughness. This interview will be recorded, and you have the right to have your attorney present. You're here voluntarily to provide information about potential federal crimes. I nodded my understanding, having discussed these procedures with Gordon the previous day. The manila folder containing my evidence sat between us like a bridge, between suspicion and proof, between family loyalty and criminal justice. These are serious allegations against your son, Mr. Grant. I need you to walk me through exactly how you discovered this evidence. Agent Ramirez, the facts speak for themselves. I opened the folder and began systematic presentation of each document, explaining the context of discovery, while she photographed and cataloged every piece of evidence. The inflated profit projections, the falsified investor presentations, the handwritten notes documenting deliberate deception. Each item added weight to the federal case. She questioned me thoroughly about my background, my relationship with Douglas, my knowledge of Grant FinTech's operations. My 40 years of business experience provided credibility, while my personal investment in the company's 2008 survival established both motive and opportunity for discovering the fraud. We'll need time for independent verification of these allegations. Agent Ramirez secured the original documents in evidence bags, following federal chain of custody protocols. During our investigation, you cannot contact the subject or discuss this matter with anyone except your attorney. Understood. I'm prepared for full cooperation. She explained the investigation timeline. Federal agencies would verify the authenticity of the documents, cross-reference with SEC filings, potentially interview other company employees. If the evidence supported criminal charges, Douglas would be arrested and face federal prosecution for securities fraud. Are you prepared to testify in federal court if this case goes to trial? Her question carried the weight of final commitment, the understanding that my cooperation would make me a key witness in my son's potential conviction. The recording equipment hummed softly as I signed the formal witness statement and cooperation agreement. Each signature marked another step away from family loyalty toward federal justice. But Douglas's systematic deception of innocent investors demanded accountability that transcended personal relationships. Walking out of the federal building an hour later, I carried Agent Ramirez's business card and a copy of my witness statement. The weight of institutional authority followed me to the parking garage, where I sat in my car for several minutes, processing what I'd just initiated. Looking back at the federal building's imposing facade, I understood there was no retreat from this path. Douglas had chosen deception over integrity, and federal justice would provide the education I'd failed to give him. Monday morning at 7 sharp, I sat in my car across from the Grant FinTech building, watching unmarked federal vehicles position themselves around the glass tower that had once represented our family's shared ambitions. Agent Ramirez had called Sunday evening to inform me that federal warrants had been secured and the arrest would proceed at morning rush hour. FBI agents in tactical gear emerged from black SUVs with military precision, their movements coordinated by radio communication and years of experience executing federal operations. The sight of federal law enforcement preparing to arrest my son created a complex mixture of vindication and parental anguish that I hadn't anticipated. Douglas's silver BMW pulled into the executive parking area at exactly 7:15, his punctuality serving him poorly for once. He emerged carrying files for investor meetings scheduled throughout the week, completely unaware that federal agents were already securing the building's entrances and elevator banks. The lobby filled with federal agents as Douglas approached the main entrance, their presence creating a controlled chaos that immediately altered the building's morning routine. Office workers arriving for normal Monday business found themselves redirected by agents maintaining perimeter security around what had become a federal crime scene. Agent Ramirez positioned herself near the elevator bank as Douglas entered the lobby, his confident stride carrying him directly toward the confrontation that would end his criminal enterprise permanently. The federal operation unfolded with mechanical efficiency. No drama, no excessive force, just professional law enforcement executing legal warrants. Douglas Grant, you're under arrest for federal securities fraud. Agent Ramirez's voice carried clearly across the marble lobby as she displayed her credentials and arrest warrant. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in federal court. This is a mistake. Call my lawyer immediately. Douglas's voice cracked with disbelief as handcuffs clicked around his wrists. The arrogant executive who had publicly humiliated me 10 days earlier now faced federal criminal charges based on evidence I'd provided. Mia Torres emerged from the elevator bank with other early arriving staff members, her face showing genuine shock at the federal operation unfolding in their workplace. What's happening here? Where is Mr. Columbus? Her loyalty to me, even in chaos, provided unexpected comfort. Federal investigation into financial fraud, ma'am? The agent's response was professional, final, offering no additional details about ongoing criminal proceedings. FBI agents simultaneously secured the Grant FinTech offices, seizing computers and financial records that would provide additional evidence of Douglas's systematic deception. The methodical nature of federal evidence collection transformed our former workplace into a documented crime scene. From my distant vantage point, I watched Douglas being escorted through the lobby in handcuffs, his expensive suit and confident demeanor replaced by the reality of federal criminal prosecution. The perp walk through the building's glass entrance would likely appear on evening news broadcasts, completing his public humiliation. Media vans began arriving as word spread about the federal operation, their cameras capturing the arrest of a prominent Chicago businessman for securities fraud. The story would dominate financial news for days, a cautionary tale about corporate greed and the long reach of federal justice. As Douglas disappeared into a federal transport vehicle, I started my car and drove slowly away from the scene. Justice had been served, but watching my son's arrest created emotional complexity I hadn't expected. The vindication felt hollow, overshadowed by the recognition that our family would never recover from this morning's events. Agent Ramirez's investigation had moved swiftly from evidence review to arrest warrant, proving that Douglas's arrogance had finally encountered consequences he couldn't manipulate or dismiss. The federal system had no tolerance for securities fraud, regardless of family connections or executive privilege. 2 months had passed since Douglas's arrest when I walked through the federal courthouse metal detectors for what would become the most difficult day of my life. My footsteps echoed against marble floors as armed marshals directed me toward courtroom 415, where I would testify against my own son in federal criminal proceedings. The courtroom's dark wood paneling and formal atmosphere created a sense of institutional gravity that made family relationships seem secondary to justice. Douglas sat at the defendant's table in an orange prison jumpsuit, his expensive suits and corporate confidence replaced by the reality of federal detention. Eleanor occupied a seat in the gallery behind me, dressed formally but carrying the weight of a mother watching her family destroy itself. Please raise your right hand. The court clerk's words carried finality as I approached the witness stand. The oath felt heavier than usual, knowing I was swearing to tell the truth about my son's criminal activities before a jury of 12 citizens who would decide his fate. Mr. Grant, how did you discover these documents? The prosecutor's first question launched me into testimony I'd rehearsed for weeks with federal attorneys. I was packing my belongings after being terminated and found them in my desk drawer. My voice remained steady as I explained the timeline of discovery, the systematic nature of Douglas's fraud, the fabricated investor presentations designed to deceive innocent people seeking legitimate investment opportunities. The defense attorney's cross-examination attacked my motives with calculated aggression. You sought revenge against your son for firing you, didn't you, Mr. Grant? I protected investors from securities fraud. Each question tested my resolve, but 40 years of business experience had taught me to separate emotion from fact, personal pain from professional responsibility. Douglas stared at me throughout the testimony, his expression mixing disbelief with betrayal. The young man who had once begged for my help now watched his father provide evidence that would send him to federal prison. Eleanor dabbed at her eyes with tissues, grieving for both her husband's pain and her son's choices. The jury deliberated for 3 hours while I waited in the courthouse hallway, processing the complexity of having testified against my own child. When they returned, their faces carried the weight of a decision that would reshape multiple lives permanently. Has the jury reached a verdict? Judge Morrison's question echoed through the silent courtroom. We have, Your Honor. The foreman's voice was clear, decisive. On all counts of securities fraud, conspiracy, and wire fraud, we find the defendant guilty. Douglas's face crumpled as the verdict registered. His attorney placed a steadying hand on his shoulder while marshals prepared to escort him back to detention. Eleanor's quiet sobs filled the courtroom's silence, but she made no move to comfort the son who had brought this upon himself. Walking past reporters shouting questions outside the courthouse, I maintained the dignity that had carried me through this ordeal. Gordon waited beside his car, ready to drive me away from the scene where justice had finally been served, though the price had proven higher than any of us anticipated. The federal system had spoken. My son was officially a convicted criminal, and I was the witness who had made it possible. The sentencing hearing in July felt different from the trial, more solemn, final, carrying the weight of consequences that couldn't be appealed or overturned. Judge Morrison reviewed pre-sentence reports, while Douglas stood in shackles, noticeably thinner after 3 months in federal detention, his arrogance finally broken by the reality of his situation. 7 years federal prison, restitution of $2.3 million to defrauded investors. Judge Morrison's sentence echoed through the courtroom with mechanical precision. The defendant will surrender all assets and forfeit his corporate positions permanently. Marshall led Douglas away without a backward glance at Eleanor or me. His wife exited the courthouse immediately, refusing to speak to reporters who shouted questions about divorce proceedings and custody arrangements. The family I'd known for 42 years had officially ceased to exist. Driving past Douglas's former mansion that afternoon, I saw the sold sign planted firmly in the manicured lawn. Real estate agents had liquidated his assets to satisfy federal restitution requirements. The house, cars, investment portfolios, everything accumulated during his fraudulent success now belonged to his victims. Eleanor met me at our kitchen table that evening, her face showing the exhaustion of watching our son's complete destruction. Was it worth losing him forever? She asked, though her tone carried acceptance rather than accusation. Justice has been served, I replied, though the words felt inadequate for the complexity of our situation. Meanwhile, Douglas adapted to federal prison routines in his concrete cell, sharing space with a roommate who listened to his bitter complaints about family betrayal. The corporate executive who had once commanded boardrooms now stood in cafeteria lines and followed guards' orders, learning lessons about respect and consequences that came 20 years too late. His children learned they couldn't visit Daddy in his new home. Their mother, filing divorce papers with systematic efficiency, explained that Daddy had made very bad choices and would be away for a long time. The grandchildren I might never see again became casualties of their father's criminal arrogance. News coverage gradually faded, but the business community remembered the Grant fintech scandal as a cautionary tale about family businesses and executive oversight. My name appeared in articles as the whistleblower father who chose justice over family loyalty, a role I'd never wanted but couldn't avoid. Federal prison records listed Douglas Grant, inmate number 47821, serving 7 years for securities fraud. His cell contained a narrow bed, small desk, and toilet, a dramatic reduction from the executive suite where he'd orchestrated his crimes. The man who had once fired his father now depended on federal correctional officers for basic privileges. Lying in my own bed that night, I reflected on the journey from public humiliation to federal witness. Eleanor slept peacefully beside me, having made peace with our choices and their consequences. Douglas's arrogance had cost him everything, while my principles had ultimately protected hundreds of innocent investors from financial ruin. The price of justice had proven higher than anticipated, but some lessons could only be learned through consequences that couldn't be negotiated, appealed, or dismissed. Federal prison would provide Douglas with 7 years to contemplate the difference between ambition and criminality. August evening light filtered through our backyard garden as I arranged chairs for the gathering Gordon had suggested. A quiet celebration of vindication among friends who had believed in my integrity throughout the ordeal. Eleanor moved efficiently between kitchen and patio, preparing food with the satisfaction of a woman whose husband had been publicly exonerated. String lights hung between mature oak trees created a warm atmosphere that felt like normal life, returning after months of federal proceedings and family trauma. Citronella candles provided protection from mosquitoes, while casting gentle shadows across our modest but well-maintained property in Oak Park. Gordon arrived with his wife, carrying champagne and wearing the satisfied expression of an attorney whose client had achieved complete vindication. Former colleagues who had initially doubted my allegations now offered handshakes and congratulations, their respect restored by federal court proceedings that had proven every accusation accurate. "You saved hundreds of investors from losing their retirement savings," Gordon announced during his toast, raising his glass toward the evening sky. "That required courage most people don't possess." Eleanor stood beside me with genuine pride, her hand resting lightly on my arm as friends acknowledged the personal cost of my decision to cooperate with federal authorities. The woman who had worried about using our savings in 2008 now celebrated her husband's willingness to sacrifice family relationships for principle. Justice sometimes comes late, but it comes. My response to Gordon's toast carried the weight of experience, loss, and hard-won wisdom about the price of integrity in family relationships. As guests gradually departed, Eleanor and I cleaned up together with the comfortable efficiency of a couple who had weathered an unexpected storm and emerged stronger. The evening had provided closure to a chapter that began with professional humiliation and ended with moral vindication. Sitting in our garden chairs as stars emerged overhead, we reflected on the journey from Douglas's corporate coup to federal conviction. The cost had been enormous: a son lost, grandchildren estranged, family relationships destroyed permanently. But the alternative had been complicity in crimes that would have devastated innocent investors. "I'm proud of you," Eleanor said quietly, her voice carrying the authority of a woman who had watched her husband choose difficult integrity over convenient family loyalty. "You did the right thing, regardless of the price." The truth had indeed been worth everything it cost. Douglas's fraudulent success had been built on foundations of deception that would have eventually collapsed, taking hundreds of investors with him. My intervention had protected those innocent people while teaching my son that respect and honesty weren't optional, even in family relationships. Federal prison would provide Douglas with 7 years to consider the difference between legitimate achievement and criminal enterprise. Perhaps someday the grandchildren would understand that their grandfather had chosen principle over family comfort, justice over personal convenience. Tonight, under stars that had witnessed both our greatest family triumph and its most devastating failure, Eleanor and I sat together in the peace that comes from knowing we had acted with integrity when integrity mattered most. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.